Hello, so today we are going deep into my childhood because The Nutty Professor was one of my absolute favourite comedy movies as a kid. It was sweet, touching, absurd, edgy, and when I rewatched it recently, all of those things were still there, and it was an incredible showcase for the talents of Eddie Murphy. The sequel, on the other hand...
Ho 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 ho, delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Yes, everybody, welcome back to Delightfully Devilish, the show where we discuss films that all at once meet the criteria of being the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm your host, Jukebox Harry, and today we are going into the cinematic subcategory of bad comedy movie sequels. A lot of sequels to some pretty iconic comedy movies will sink really low in a desperate attempt to try to get an audience. These include Son of the Mask, Caddyshack 2, and Teen Wolf 2. That last one I'm going to talk about someday because you should know just how much I love Teen Wolf. All these examples share one recurring theme. They lose the star who has made their first film such a success and try to go on with a different person. The Nutty Professor II, the Klumps, does not have this problem. Eddie Murphy comes back and plays every single character over again. We also get enough of the supporting cast from the first film returning, as well as half of the original writers. Half. After watching this film, I'm still not really sure whether I like it or not. It's definitely funny, but even as a kid it felt weird for reasons I never fully understood. Now I definitely can. For those of you that haven't seen the first film, I would highly recommend it. It's about the kind-hearted but obese Professor Sherman Klump, who invents a serum that makes him lose 250 pounds. But his thin self begins to develop its own persona named Buddy Love, which causes a literal identity crisis. In the sequel, he's buried that persona and he's now getting married, with Eddie Murphy once again playing every member of the entire Klump family.
Well, look what rolled in. You know, at first I thought you was an old ass raisinette riding on a skateboard.
Yes, I'd like to come over there and choke the life out of you right in front of Jesus.
Sweet Lord, give me strength today. Don't make me have to whip nobody's head in the church.
Ignore him, Lord, ignore all his prayers. He ain't nothing did nothing. Twist it back, miss it laser, give him a stroke or something.
And he's getting married to Janet Jackson, who plays Denise Gaines. But then...
will forever hold his penis.
Baby.
Oh, sure!
That's it, son. Show him what the Klumps are made of.
That's the first joke of the film, a massive erection. Wait for the second.
Surprise!
Head for a penis! Yeah. Head for a penis! Ain't no way you gonna beat us! Cause a head for a penis!
Calm down, boy. What's wrong with you?
Nutty Professor II doesn't give itself a second before it delves into the lowest level of crude humor, although as a kid I will say, I thought this was the funniest thing in the world. Looking at it now, I'm just more surprised that it was literally the first joke in the film. But like I said before, we have half the original writers. The other half have been replaced by the creators of American Pie. And in retrospect, that makes a lot of sense because there's a major shift in the humor between the first film and this one. Buddy Love literally exits Sherman Klump's ass and steals his fiancée.
See you later, chunky butt! And then I wake up in a cold sweat.
Turns out it was all a dream he's been recalling in a psychologist's office.
You will never learn to control him until you accept the fact that he is a part of you.
Yeah, and I'm the best part too. And I tell you something else, punk. All these diplomas on this wall don't make up for the fact that you got a little Vienna sausage in your drawers. Is that why they call you a shrink?
When you think about what Eddie Murphy is literally doing in this scene, it is surreal as hell. Eddie Murphy is playing a character in a fat suit who is pretending to be someone else. Wow. Sherman's psychologist encourages him to get a grip on the situation.
I'm in charge.
I can't hear you.
I'm in charge.
The sequel doesn't have as many fat jokes as the first one did because the character's weight isn't as inherent to the plot this time, but still, there's a couple. Peter Segal, there's an interesting name. This is the guy who directed Tommy Boy, Anger Management, 50 First Dates, The Longest Yard, Get Smart, and Grudge Match. So I've enjoyed about 2/3 of this director's films, even though I've pretty often realized the shortcomings in a lot of the stories. None of his films have actually ever earned a fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, so yeah, you're definitely not in for anything groundbreaking. Buddy Love starts acting up again.
Beautiful day, isn't it, Professor?
Bite me, old hag.
What?
And he steadily gets a little more aggressive.
Kinda hot today, huh, Professor?
You have no idea how hot it is. Yeah. Hot, nice and hot.
Oh, Professor, I loved your lecture the other day.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Hang on a second. What lecture? What day? And you're not even going to say goodbye? I know this is a very small thing to be focusing on, but it just goes to show that the jokes in this film have come at the expense of the screenplay. Ha, he's fat. Larry Miller comes back as Dean Richmond, the charismatic arsehole from the first film.
Don't be bashful, Professor Gaines. Pound for pound, this big lug's the greatest scientist on the planet. And let's be honest, pound for pound, he is a planet.
Larry Miller always seems to play uptight assholes, but honestly, in the Nutty Professor films, these are the best examples of his talent. Sherman has invented a different serum this time, one that can de-age living creatures.
Jiminy freaking cricket!
Although the effects are still only at a temporary stage.
Klump, party of 6, please.
Yep, you know what this means. This entire scene was almost cut from the film because it isn't 100% necessary to the story, but you can tell it was left in there so that audiences could have more time enjoying banter with the Klump family at dinner. So it makes perfect sense. And what's really impressive is that in this shot here, you can see Eddie Murphy playing all the characters in the exact same take, and it's actually very impressively done. He plays every character except Denise and his nephew.
Stop that! Baby, leave the ball hands up like that. Hey, get your ass on. Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys.
Ooh, there's a line of dialogue that definitely would not fly today.
You is an old man.
Shit, Grandma, what's wrong with you? Well, if it isn't the Alzheimer Express, right on schedule.
They're out for dinner to celebrate Papa Cletus's retirement. Let me just give you the highlights of this scene.
He and I just started getting kind of frisky in the car. And I had to give him a little appetizer.
Ooh, mama. I just lost my damn appetite.
I got a razor in this bag.
Oh, yeah? I'll tell you what, that ain't even no bag you got in your hand. That's your titty. Cletus. Go to Grandma's titty bag. If it isn't the world's oldest living Negro. Some toothpick. Nasty. If I want to put a trumpet in my ass and run around this restaurant and blow Hallelujah Yankee Doodle, that's my business.
Mr. Johnson, perhaps?
Let me tell you something. What I do in my bedroom is my business. You understand?
The only thing you do in your bedroom is pull the lint off your scrotum.
Sherman tries to calm everyone down, but Buddy intercepts.
And I'd just like to say, in front of everybody here tonight, when you gonna stop jabbing and tell everybody you got laid off?
Cletus starts by choking on his food. Then he starts a fire with one of his farts, and it ends with him spitting the rest of a meatball across the room into Grandma's boyfriend's soup, which he then proceeds to eat. This is the standard of humor in the entire film. This is the scene that will determine whether you will actually like this movie or not. Honestly, I thought this scene was funny, but at the same time, I was still constantly surprised at just how lowbrow the jokes kept going. The first film definitely had its fair share of crude humor, but this one is so much more one note in how it does it. Sherman goes to propose to Denise with a mariachi band, but Buddy comes back and ruins it.
Denise, will you?
Hey, Sherman! You hear me, Sherman?
Denise, will you? Let me come up there and put my beef in your taco.
After letting her down, Klump once again finds himself using a scientific experiment to impress a woman, extracting all traces of Buddy's DNA somehow. While this is happening, we have a subplot. The first movie didn't actually have any subplots. This is a new thing. Sherman's parents are having marital problems because Cletus can't get a hard-on.
What about Viagra? Viagra don't work for me. I've been taking them like M&Ms.
And all the while, the lab experiment dog sets off a chain of events which knocks Buddy's DNA into an electrical circuit where it manages to merge with canine DNA. The first Nutty Professor required suspension of disbelief for you to accept the story, but the sequel is really pushing it. And then we have a remake of the scene from the remake of Cape Fear in a cinema where they're watching the original Cape Fear.
Just when you thought it was safe to go back to the theaters.
Buddy Love is back, and this time he wants Sherman's de-aging formula. He goes to meet with the head of a company that's interested in buying it for $150 million, and he exhibits the behavior of a dog along the way, doing things such as sniffing around and shitting on newspaper.
Good God! What good God? I went on the paper!
So the DNA impacted his molecular structure but didn't change anything about his physical appearance?
You wakers!
You can tell this was put in here because someone was like, hey, what if Eddie Murphy plays a dog in this movie? But like, we don't have to spend any money on the dog's costume. It just... My sense of disbelief in this story is like me in my first high school. It's always getting suspended. Sherman finds that his knowledge has started slipping as a side effect of the experiment, and it's gotten to the point that he can't even beat a hamster on a race through a maze. And after finding that his house has been torn up, he decides to hide his youth formula in his father's refrigerator. Meanwhile, in the world of subplots, Mama and Grandma are getting their hair done and talking filth again with Wanda Sykes.
The other day I got out to shower, and I bent down to reach for a towel, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I was standing on my own titty.
Cletus goes to pick them up and discovers that his wife has been telling everyone that he's been experiencing erectile dysfunction.
Can't get nothing with a lip noodle. Oops.
In frustration, Cletus goes home and drinks the youth formula, which knocks several years off him. So now, we have Eddie Murphy playing the father of the main character, but playing him in a much younger form. The guy has range. A woman in a bar starts hitting on him, which makes her old-ass ex-boyfriend jealous, so he takes Cletus outside and beats the absolute shit out of him. This is geriatric karate. It's really hard to put into words how amazed I am that they just kept on pulling these weird jokes out. Sherman goes to finally meet his fiance's parents, but when he gets asked to explain his research on genetic extraction to them, in his newfound ignorance he attempts to use a corn cob as a metaphor, which results in him spilling corn in everyone's faces, accidentally throwing it right in the face of the family's 50-year-old parrot, and then dragging everything off the table when he gets the tablecloth caught in his fly. These are actually some of the more subtle jokes in the film, and they're not really all that funny. Maybe you might prefer Eddie Murphy acting like a dog. Cletus returns home to surprise his wife with his younger self, but she isn't favourable of the idea.
It's okay, babe. It's okay. And it's me. It's Cletus. I'm just young again. I took some of Sherman's youth juice and it's incredible. Look, baby, I got enough of both of us. I don't want no magic formula. Cletus, we're supposed to be who we are. And I'm just fine with who I am. But obviously what you're trying to say is that you just tired of the fat old woman that you got married to.
Mama Klump makes a really good point here about accepting age as a natural part of life. The problem is that while she's hitting him with this guilt trip, she's completely forgetting the fact that earlier in the film she was trash-talking her husband by boasting about his inadequacies to everybody. She gets so worked up at her husband for going through all that because of the fact that she was trash-talking him and making him feel more insecure, but she's getting upset because he's acting on the insecurity that she has highlighted in him. Sure, she definitely didn't want her husband responding in the way that he did, but she definitely had an impact on his decisions, and now she has no sympathy for that. Whatever, Sherman falls asleep in front of the TV once again, which means we're about to get another surreal dream sequence. In the first Nutty Professor film, Sherman's dreams were used as ridiculously absurd allegories for his fears about his weight. His first one began as a reenactment from that scene from Greece, while his second one was a lot more King Kong influenced, and it was an actual change of tone for the humor in the film, because the rest of the jokes in the movie were a lot more grounded than this one. In the Nutty Professor II, the jokes are so outlandish that when the film starts to parody Armageddon, it doesn't have the same outlandish shock value. It actually kind of makes sense, even though the entire point of the joke is that it shouldn't make sense. They even parody Star Wars.
There's a force deep down inside you. Use it. Use your force, Sherman.
Yep, you knew a fart joke was coming, there it is. Klump reaches the detonation button, but apparently because he's now so stupid he planted the bomb in the wrong place.
Oh shit.
The special effects in this scene are decent, but the sheer absurdity of the joke isn't innovative because I actually believe it in this film. And that's the problem, I shouldn't believe that this is normal, but I do, because that is the brand of this film's humor. Also in the first film, these dreams were wake-up calls for Sherman. They inspired him to change things about his life. In The Nutty Professor II, we just get this one line.
I am idiot.
And that's it. Nothing else comes of it. Then we're at Denise's bachelorette party, and instantly I got chills because I remember a very disturbing joke playing out in this scene which creeped me out as a kid. Buddy Love sneaks into the house attempting to find Sherman's formula, and when he finally does, he pours an unspecified substance into it to hide his crime. Grandma Klump confuses him for a stripper and tries to make a move on him. Here it is, this joke was like Vietnam for me as a kid. The only thing that makes this scene worse is the fact that since Buddy is composed of Sherman Klump's DNA, this is not just unconsensual sexual activity and adultery, but also incest.
Adultery is bad, but incest is fucked up!
Do not make the mistake of thinking that this is going to be the most shocking and lowbrow joke in the entire film.
Oh no, we're not done yet.
Sherman gives his presentation on his youth formula, stumbling through a lot of his words. But when he tests it out, that's when things get strange. The hamster grows to astronomical size and starts terrorizing everyone. Then it starts shooting giant turds across the room like bullets, and finally it goes and rapes Dean Richmond.
No, please, I'm not that kind of...
Something like that'll ruin a man.
That's it. That joke was the peak of absurdity in this film, and I'm still shocked that it's actually there.
On the way over here, a cute little boy pointed to me and said, "Oh, look, Mommy, there goes the hamster's bitch!"
Sherman gets fired again, predictably, and he finds out that his cognitive function is in a very fast state of decline, so he breaks things off with Denise to give her a better life. But when having a heart-to-heart talk with his dad, he has an epiphany.
If we get back together, then that'll make everything okay. Dynamite, go and call the girl. Not Denise, I'm talking about Buddy. Say what? The youth formula. I feed it to Buddy and make him so young I'll turn him back into goop. Huh? And I eat it.
Alright, so there's a couple of bad signs in this scene that I want to break down. So first of all, since Sherman is losing his cognitive faculty, he's getting a lot dumber, so that means he's probably not in the state of mind to be making a logical decision right now. And second of all, the scientific logic doesn't make sense. The de-aging formula only has temporary effects, so if Buddy does get reduced to his genetic goop and then eaten by Sherman Klump, that means after a certain amount of time, he would regrow and expand in Sherman Klump's body, and then it would end up being like that episode of The Simpsons where Homer and Mr. Burns exist in the same body at the same time. Either that, or it would destroy him, because there's no possible way that two human bodies can coexist in literally the exact same body. And thirdly, if he does reintroduce Buddy Love back to his genetic makeup, that would just take him back to square one. He would have Buddy Love existing as a voice inside his head again. But not just that, he would have dog Buddy Love living inside of him, so he would have all these weird canine habits that Buddy has adopted in this film. I want you to remember the points that I've made just here, because it's important to see how they impact the story later. Sherman finds Buddy in the middle of a presentation on his formula and throws him a tennis ball. Get it? Because he's a dog? Surprise! The ball has been laced with the de-aging formula and it turns Buddy into a toddler. And once again, the film breaks its own scientific logic.
Oh, shit!
When Buddy Love came back earlier, he went straight from being a pile of goop to an adult. There was no transition period in between where he was ever a toddler, so he physically should not be able to regress back to being a toddler. But of course, this decision wasn't made on the basis of scientific logic.
What the hell are you looking at? This is an impressive package for a toddler.
This decision was made for another cheap joke, which in this case is about a foul-mouthed toddler punching Dean Richmond and peeing on him before running off.
I want that formula. Bring me the man who made it. I'm ready to make a deal.
Terrible. Things turn into a bit of body horror as Buddy's molecular structure starts to disassemble. He gets picked up by a car tire and eventually stuck to a woman's butt, which leads to, you guessed it,
Oh, you're doing it!
unfortunately, Buddy ends up dissipating, and Sherman deteriorates to the point of being a bumbling idiot. The film takes a bit of a sweet turn here as Sherman apologizes for everything.
I didn't want to hurt you. You understand? I thought that if you knew that Buddy was a part of me, I thought that you wouldn't have me then.
Sherman.
But then we're back to confusing science when somehow Denise's tears fix everything.
God, it's Buddy. His DNA dispersed in the water molecules, Sherman, quick.
Science!
With Buddy's molecules in the water, Sherman starts drinking it to regain his cognitive function.
Come on, boy, get this snoot. What's your mama middle name? Oh, hell no, that ain't it.
And this literally fixes everything. Realistically speaking, if Buddy Love's molecules had actually dissipated into this water fountain, then Sherman Klump would actually have to drink more water than Harold Holt to regain his full cognitive function. And then literally everything in the film is fixed. Sherman is back to normal without any sign of Buddy's persona or his dog habits. He's happily married and Cletus gets a boner again.
Cletus, is that you?
Damn right.
And for some reason we get this joke.
Call my own.
And life is worth living again.
For all the ridiculous jokes in this film, when I saw that joke, I literally said out loud. So remember all those points I made about this film's scientific logic earlier? Yeah, the film completely forgot about them. And then the film ends, and you might be surprised because it feels like it kind of came out of nowhere. Pacing in The Nutty Professor II is one of the film's weaknesses. It throws a bunch of skits at you to distract from the fact that it's not actually going anywhere, and then it just ends and you're going to be left feeling surprised. Anyway, is The Nutty Professor II The Klumps a good film? No, but it is funny, so it kind of succeeds as a comedy, I guess. The backbone of this film is obviously Eddie Murphy. I mean, just look at this clip from the credits. He played this many characters. And he was incredibly convincing. Every single time I've watched The Nutty Professor and its sequel, there has never been a moment where I was not 100% convinced that every character was their own persona. Eddie Murphy really ties the entire film together with his amazing talent for versatility and comic timing. The best moments in the film all come from the banter between separate characters played by him. The ridiculous situations, however, they're a lot more hit and miss. 3 years after the original Nutty Professor was released, American Pie came out, which boosted the profiles of directors Paul and Chris Weitz humongously. And following the success of that film, the two directors were asked to come on board and help with The Nutty Professor II The Klumps, because Tom Shadyac and Steve Odekirk, who wrote and directed the original film, did not want to come back for it. If you look at American Pie, the films are mostly defined by their iconic gross-out gags, with jokes about having sex with an apple pie and having one's hand super glued to their penis. Jokes like this were occasionally sprinkled into the first Nutty Professor, but they were subtle. They weren't relied on to carry the entire movie. And they still managed to come as a surprise every time, even though they did pop up semi-frequently. The majority of absurdity in the first film came more from the ridiculousness of Buddy Love's attitude and how heavily it contrasted with Sherman Klump's persona. With the sequel, the film is about having a head for a penis, starting fires with farts, geriatric street fights, planet Earth being destroyed, unconsenting geriatric incest, a foul-mouthed baby peeing on people, and bestial rape. These are the jokes that made me know I had to do an episode on this film. The sheer absurdity of all the punchlines in this movie went above and beyond the ridiculous science fiction nature of the story. Honestly, it's kind of fascinating to watch a mainstream big budget comedy go for jokes that are just this ridiculous. And they don't always deliver on the laughter, which is a downfall of this film because it is in fact a comedy, but at the same time, it did constantly manage to shock me, and I was laughing from time to time. A lot of the critics who dislike this film commend this film for still being funny from time to time and for Eddie Murphy's amazing performance, but they find that the problem lies more in the film's style of humor and in its storytelling. For one thing, the film's pacing is all over the place because the story is constantly trying to rely on subplots and the extended involvement of the Klump family to try and carry things, and every single time things start to focus on them, there is suddenly a big halt in any narrative movement. But also, one of the hooks of the first film was just how likable Sherman Klump was as a character. He was such a kind-hearted and objectively likable person, and he still is the second time around, but while the first film had us sympathizing with him and his tale of triumph over his lack of self-confidence, he doesn't have the same arc this time. All of the self-confidence he gained from the first film is immediately stripped away so that he can ruin his life with another experiment, and rather than actually developing as a character in this story, he just eventually resolves everything with a lot of Deus Ex Machina. He never triumphs over the Buddy Love persona within him, and we don't see him really learn all that much from the situation because the film spends more time on the other characters, and in the end, all his problems just get written out of the story in an all too convenient fashion. The Nutty Professor II The Klumps gets 5 acts of giant hamster rape out of 10. It's a very one-note sequel, which increases the flatulence and crude humor of the first film at the expense of its heart, character development, and pacing. But regardless, Eddie Murphy is still hilarious, and he does an incredible job playing so many characters convincingly. And that does it for today's episode of Delightfully Devilish, you guys. If there's any movies you would like me to discuss on this show, please leave them in the comment section below. If you would like to see more episodes, please hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, until next time, I have been your host, Jukebox Harry. Peace!